Hello, everyone. We hope that wherever you are, you're safe and well. I'm Marilyn, the founder and CEO of Cosmic Centaurs, and we're a leadership and organizational development firm. Today, you're joining us for the sixth session in the seventh annual Cosmic Conference, a 3-week virtual conference taking place between March 25th and April 17th. While the conference is typically held later in the year in October, the gravity of events across the region made it clear to us that this conversation couldn't wait. And to support leaders when they need it the most, we chose to bring this year's edition forward and convene this conversation now. Our conference is titled Grounded and Limitless, Leading Organizations That Survive and Thrive. And through the conference, we're hoping to support leaders as they manage prolonged uncertainty. And at its core, this idea of being grounded and limitless is about both staying clear-eyed about reality, but also continuing to build what's possible. And to explore this, we're bringing together more than 15 leaders, experts, and academics to try and collectively make sense of what leadership requires in moments like these. And we're doing this across 3 themes. Endure, how do we survive periods of uncertainty? Adapt, how do we evolve in response to change? And thrive, how do we turn lessons learned in crisis into a competitive advantage, emerging stronger, more innovative, and better prepared for the future? And you are tuning in during week 1. The topic is Endure, and it's all about helping leaders face reality, preserve stability, and protect what matters most in moments of prolonged stress. The team will drop the link to the remaining program in the chat below. Our speaker, Rabih Brair, who I'll introduce in just a minute, and I would love for you to actively participate in this session. Please share your reflections, your questions, your experience. I know today's topic is a bit sensitive, but it could be from experiences you've had in the past, not necessarily what's going today. But if you know someone who might find value in today's conversation, later on, the episode will be available to stream on YouTube and in podcast format, and you'll be able to share it with them. If you find value in these sessions across the conference and you want to give something back to us as a team, we'd really love for you to take our survey. We're conducting research to capture how leaders in this region are navigating uncertainty, because we believe that we have something that we can teach the rest of the world. Our team will drop a link in the chat to our Leading in the Arab World survey. If you have 5 minutes, it would mean the world to us. Today's session, Decisive and Compassionate Leadership in Downsizing, will be a session where I host Rabih Brair. Rabih, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, you are a returning guest of the conference and therefore a true centaur. Let me just quickly introduce you to those who don't know you. Rabih is the CFO at Mevo, which is an AI-powered business solution supporting small and medium enterprise growth. He is also the managing partner and co-founder at Tandem, a Dubai-based advisory firm working with startups, small and medium enterprises, and family businesses across the region. With over 15 years of experience across corporate finance, audit, and strategic leadership roles, including time at Anderson, PwC, and Mars, Rabih brings technical depth and a very, very practical, on-the-ground perspective to our topic today. I'm really thrilled to have you with us. Very grateful for all the insights that you'll provide us. I'll just take a little moment to frame, of course, why this conversation is important. Across the region here, with both the geopolitical and economical uncertainty, we're definitely, all of us, witnessing a slowdown and a tightening of the market. And this is true across industries. And of course, in response, it is only normal for organizations to start looking at costs to be reduced, potentially downsizing, restructuring, and refocusing on specific areas of their business. And if we look back at COVID, at the peak of COVID, about 81% of the global workforce had been affected by workplace closures and other choices that organizations made. The scale of disruption was unprecedented, and we are experiencing it again today. And sometimes the instinct is to react extremely quickly. That's not a bad thing necessarily, but sometimes the cost of reacting too quickly can be significant, not just financially, but culturally and organizationally. We are starting to see organizations talk about the choices they're making. And one that I want to highlight today is ITP Media Group, which recently announced a temporary move to a 4-day work week across its Middle East offices, reducing salaries accordingly, and then senior leadership taking a larger share of the reduction, while protecting employees in the lowest pay bands. I really thought that, of course, it's never a good day when a leader has to make a choice like this one, but this approach, for now, at least, doesn't eliminate the pressure or the stress of what is going on, but it tries to distribute it differently in both a structured and transparent way. So today, that's really what we want to explore. We want to talk about how leaders can navigate these moments with structure, with clarity, with care, and we'll be covering that with Rabia. Rabia, to start us off, from your work with clients and organizations across the region, how are you seeing companies, broadly reacting to the crisis, and how has this evolved over the past few weeks?
Yeah, I think that the key part of that question is the how has it evolved over the past few weeks, because up until a couple of weeks ago, I think the spectrum was a lot broader than it is today. A couple of weeks ago, there was still a handful of people or clients that were in wait and see mode, which, look, I think depending on your exposure to the risk here, I think it's justifiable in very niche sectors, very niche sort of business sizes. But I think as of today, or as of sort of the most recent conversations I've had, everyone is taking active measures now. I don't think anyone is kind of left in wait and see mode. Nobody's in is this going to affect us, or is this not going to affect us, sort of mode anymore. It's very clear that it's going to affect everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. And what are you starting to see in terms of, are we talking cost cutting? Are we talking layoffs? Obviously, without naming any names, like where do you see this falling, and how people are responding right now?
So it's a range. It's a range. I think on the smaller side of businesses, I've seen really sort of heartfelt efforts from founder-led businesses to not impact the team, and they sort of are taking the brunt of any sort of cost cutting, and this obviously entails them just not collecting sort of a salary or anything like that. Don't know how sustainable that is. I think that's really meant to be a temporary measure. It's great to hear stuff like ITP coming out and being really transparent in what I think is a very measured sort of response to the reality right now. I think it's a reasonable. Obviously, we don't have all the details. We don't have all the fine print. This is it. There's a lot we don't know, but from what we know, like I said, I think it's a measured response. I think some of my clients have unfortunately had to do straight up layoffs. I think downsizing in its most old school, sort of immediate impact is not necessarily the best, because you do have to pay end of service in this region, right? I mean, it's not as a cash outlay, it might not be the best choice to do, especially if this if this conflict sort of is resolved in a matter of another couple of weeks, and then ramping up starts again. All of a sudden you find yourself having outlaid a lot of cash. Maybe it's positive thinking. I see you smile at my maybe I'm being overly positive, but I mean, if that is the scenario, then what you've ended up doing is outlaying a whole bunch of cash when you're supposed to be preserving cash. I think a more appropriate response would probably be to have mutually agreed salary cuts. Whether that means fewer days, fewer shifts, fewer hours, whatever sort of that looks like. In any case, most businesses today are less busy, right? There's a lower utilization, whatever your business may be. So I think you can easily justify fewer hours, days, etc. The fact that it's mutually agreed is also super important. First of all, you want it to be legal, right? You want it to be legit with the labor department. So it needs to be above board and documented, and anything, any sort of side agreement that you have with the employee really does need to mention how long this is for and how does it impact their end of service. Is it going to be calculated based on the old salary or the newer salary? So there's a lot of these considerations that you have to take into account, but something like that actually ends up having a net positive cash sort of position as a business. So I think that's the most common response that I've seen. I've seen a lot of businesses also ask their employees to take their paid leave now, which was actually quite common, more common than I thought would be. So that's zero cash outlay. You're asking people to go on holiday for a period where, and to me, that's really close to wait and see as well, right? Because I mean, people aren't going to take, or they're not going to take 8 weeks of paid leave, right? It just doesn't work like that. So they're going to take whatever paid leave that they can, and they're going to come back to work, and then you actually have to, you've kicked the can down the road, but now you actually have to look at what is your more sustainable solution.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I smiled earlier because I think a lot of us spend a lot of energy trying to figure out when something will shift in the current situation. And I'm a bit more of a scenario planning. And I think if that leave thing it works if the scenario is that there's return to a better work rhythm, let's say in Q3 or Q4, at least you've gotten rid of those days off and you're able to deliver more work and to recognize more revenue. The salary cuts allows you to extend your runway. Like, I really think that, leaders have to think that all options are possible. Of course, you may be optimistic and think a week or 2 or 3 or 4. I try not to attach myself personally to any date because, especially with the tweeting president, you never know what's going to come out next week. But I do think definitely that planning for all possible timelines is really, really important. And one thing that I wanted to ask you about is that we spoke a few weeks ago, as you said, and it was a lot about like, oh, people are still in wait and see mode, and now we're seeing them go into action. And I think these things always fall on a bit of a spectrum. I read an article this week by Chiara Spina, who's an assistant professor of entrepreneurship and family enterprise at INSEAD, and what she was saying is that there are 2 common traps that leaders will fall into in moments of uncertainty. They will either go into paralysis, which was a little bit of what you were talking about a few weeks ago, or they'll go into panic-driven action. And I think the discipline is somewhere in the middle, right? Taking time to think deliberately, but still moving forward, still sometimes, and of course, making hard decisions. What are the risks of people reacting? You told us about, if you lay off people now, you owe them their end of service benefits. So from a cash perspective, actually not so great. Are there any kind of other big risks from reacting too quickly in this environment as well?
So look, I mean, we've seen emotional, I don't want to say overreaction, but basically maybe reactions that were very quick. I think people have the COVID lockdown PTSD, especially, sort of founders and business owners definitely are extremely marked by what happened, 6 years ago. The risks that you run are ending up with a team or a business that's not properly supported, like internally, right? So remove the external sort of variables. There's no way you can control, any of that. So you really need to focus internally. And if you start getting rid of, sort of people that are costly, let's say to your P&L without any regard for what does that do for the fundamentals, what does that do for the whatever infrastructure, let's call it, of your team and of your business, it could be a little bit short-sighted. Other than the cash aspect, which we just talked about, there is silly things like, all right, well, who's going to be reading those emails that this person is meant to be reading? Like, who's going to handle the projects that this person is handling? Who's going to deal with the suppliers that this person is dealing with? There's just these rushed handover or rushed transition. It's just trouble, right? It's just waiting for disaster. So these are the kind of things that especially on the SME side, where people wear many hats by design, right? In a small team, you could end up setting yourself up for trouble. And it's clear that this is happening in some businesses.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned the COVID-19 crisis. Actually, that's something we wanted to ask you about. Of course, like the UAE in particular, because of COVID-19, the financial crisis before that, like it's a place where the system kind of teaches you to react fast, which is not necessarily a bad thing, because I've been in companies that have waited too long to react and ended up being bankrupt. So I actually think that having a strong immune system is not necessarily a bad thing. But maybe can we spend a minute here distinguishing, because of course, as a leader, for example, myself, I only was in a senior leader position in the COVID crisis. I was not a senior leader in 2008. And so many leaders today will be in that position, right? Where they were not already a CEO 20 years ago. Which means they're referring to that crisis and trying to see what they learned then and trying to apply it here. In which ways are those two crises similar or different, and what should we learn from them?
Look, I'm gonna focus on COVID because I think it's closer to sort of our memory and sort of practical examples. I think COVID in a lot of sectors were decimated simply because you went from 100 down to 0, right? Mm-hmm. People weren't allowed out of their homes. You weren't allowed to go to a restaurant. You weren't allowed to go to whatever, an entertainment venue. You weren't allowed to do any of these things where a lot of businesses depended on. So the 100 to 0 obviously slammed the brakes on any sort of inflow of cash or revenue or anything like that. I think in this particular case, yeah, I mean, there are similarities, but at the end of the day, people are still going out, people are still, they're still, purchasing, they're still going to restaurants, and I'm giving, sort of very simple examples here, and I know a lot is on hold, but we aren't forced by regulation to not make a penny, right, in many sectors, which was the case during COVID. The regulation dictated that we literally couldn't make a penny, and you really had to pivot from whatever restaurant to a delivery business, or from a fitness concept to like at home sort of fitness classes or something like that. So I think there is a distinction, but the fear, like I said, the PTSD obviously lives on. The first couple of weeks when people started realizing that, I'm going to be working from home for a while, people started saying to each other, this is like lockdown vibes. This is giving lockdown feeling. So, but I think it's important to make that distinction. We're not there, right? We're not there. I think I just want to go back to what you just said, which is it makes sense to get ahead of this and not wait too long, be proactive and take measured steps. But at the same time, it's not lockdown, it's not COVID, right? I'm more optimistic about, and I think it's going to be hopefully a shorter period of time, at the risk of shooting myself in the foot here. But I'm hoping it will be a quicker recovery as well.
Yeah, I mean, definitely we saw like the first couple of weeks, it did have COVID vibes. But to your point, if you go out today, you go to restaurants, go to the beach, whatever it is, you will see people are still living, maybe a bit slower, maybe a bit less. But people are
a lot less. Let's be real. It's a lot less, but it's not 0.
Yeah. So you can get creative and you can still try to find a route to revenue at least. That actually, we're speaking a little bit about like these different scenarios and planning and so on. Like, of course, in a period like this, you don't want to be rash, but you also don't want to, think all of your decisions. We see this a lot. Like, I mean, even just conversationally, if not even with leaders, any conversation you have today, people are saying, I read this piece of news and that one, and here's my prediction, and the Strait will open or it won't, and America will pull out or it'll stay or whatever. Like there's a lot of conjecture. And of course, planning is an important tool, but you have to also find the right balance, right? There's a moment where trying to have too many scenarios, asking for too much data, actually limits your ability to make the right kind of decision. So one of the things that we wanted to ask you is, as leaders, again, we're faced with, do we downsize? Do we enter a new market? Do we cut salaries? Do we send everybody off on paid leave or not? Like whatever, possible actions we could take. We wanted to have a conversation with you about like cutting through the fat in terms of what data will you look at, right? And so if you were advising me today and saying, Marilyn, if you want to know what decision to make, here's where I would have you start. What would that be? What would it sound like?
So, look, I think it's important to acknowledge one thing is that a lot of times founders, sort of business owners, their gut feeling is not wrong. It's correct, right? I mean, today something needs to be done. There's a lot of noise. There's a lot of, fear mongering. There's a lot going on. Some of it is optimistic. Some of it is super pessimistic. So for me, my approach is, like you said, cut the fat, go back to basics, super, super, super fundamental, and really just try to quantify the risk. I'm putting on like a really, sort of financial hat here, but really you need to quantify the risk to your business, right? So if your, sort of typical month is 100, where are you going to end the month, or what does it look like you're going to end the month? What is that gap, right? So on sales, I'm talking about sales here. Really try to quantify what is the risk to your revenue and what does that mean for your break even and your profit. How much cash do you have in the bank? Your runway. The other things that you need to look at, obviously, are your receivables. Some people are owed money. People are very sort of reluctant to write that check or make that transfer now for something that they owe, given the current situation. So you need to also look at, people owe me people owe me this much money. It's really about going back to the basics of picking up the phone and having a conversation with these people, and so really and quantifying whether there is a risk on this receivable or not, because that's receivable equals cash, so and then similarly, companies have payables, and you need to prioritize what's a non-negotiable, like salaries and stuff like that, and where can you have certain conversations with a landlord, where can you have certain conversations with maybe an overseas supplier or something like that, about how much cash you can preserve. So this exercise ideally needs to be done, by the founder, with or without a finance, sort of in-house, maybe finance expert or something like that. But I think there needs to be a pretty careful exercise like that done to quantify exactly how much your risk is. Some sectors are a lot more affected than others. Some sectors it's simpler. They don't have receivables. They're cash businesses only. Some will be much more affected through sales, for example. So it really depends on the sector of the business. But this exercise kind of really needs to be done in order to decide, all right, this is how much I need to save, because that is, I've quantified my downside, I've quantified my risk, and therefore this is how much I need to save. Or taking on an approach of, I have this much in the bank, and I'm willing to bite the bullet for 3 months and not do anything about this for the time being. And in 3 months, if this is not resolved, then I'm going to have a conversation with my own pay, my team's pay, and things like that. So there's such a, I mean, at a glance, there might not seem like there's that much in the toolbox to reduce your costs, but there is a variety of ways to apply it, right? Are you applying it today? Are you applying it next month? Are you applying it just to senior people or just to the founder? Are you applying it to the whole team equally? Are you, there's a lot of ways that you can apply the same tool, I think is what I'm trying to say. I don't know if that was clear. Or...
Yeah, I think actually it's very helpful to think about that. And, when we were preparing for this, I was joking with you that, like, actually what the advice you're you're giving is go back to like doing math as if you were a greengrocer, a Kenje or a Bakala or a UAE.
Literally.
And it's really going back to, I think you guys maybe would call it like the free cash flow that you have inside the bank, the company,
That's it. You got to go back to sort of what everyone is taught not to do in the accounting and finance world, which is cash basis, right? Like you're taught to do accrual basis accounting and all of that, like complicated stuff. That this needs to bring it back down to the simplest form of accounting, which is, what's the money in, what's the money out. I think you need to set aside for the time being growth. You need to see, the pyramid of like SME, right? So you have your cash, then your margin, and then your growth, right? That's kind of your, you need to set aside, sort of growth and margins for the time being, and you really need to just focus on cash, because this is what keeps the lights on. This is what keeps your team loyal, motivated, etc. And I think you need to a certain extent share that burden, but do it in a way which is transparent and sort of trying to with some regard to their livelihood. I think someone who's being laid off today is going to have a really, really hard time, sort of finding a role right now. So I think the idea of doing it with a little bit of compassion is more relevant than ever, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're definitely going to spend some time talking about that. I wanted to share, like myself as a founder. So I think one blessing, but of course we only do this post trauma, is that one of my first jobs, I worked for an organization that I loved to death, but that ended up going bankrupt. And when I started Cosmic, just kind of reeling from that experience, I said, I will not do that. This will not happen to me again. And so I've always had a bit of a cash basis, even though of course my accountants do their art over there, right? And it allows us to be auditable and whatever. But for me as a leader, I've always cared about that. I've cared about how much runway we have in the bank in terms of savings. And I've always tried to make sure that, it's not to say that I'm sure I'm never going to, that for sure we will survive this crisis. Maybe if it lasts 3 years, we won't. But at least it allows me to make decisions today from a place of safety, knowing that for my people, we have 6-month runway in the bank cash, including if everything stopped today, like no more clients, no inflow, no sales, no revenue. At least we have a choice as to what the next 6 months look like, or if we extend it and so on. So I think that was really helpful in some ways to have been through that experience, because it forced me to have this kind of financial safety net. And like you said, I went back and I was like, okay, everybody, this is how much money we have in the bank. This is how much we're owed. These are the contracts that are signed. Let's assume that 50% of them are renegotiated down. This is how much time we have. Now we can, as you say, deploy all these tools, knowing, okay, if we have X months of runway and we want to turn it into X plus 2 or X plus 3, here we go. Let's figure out together what we need to do. And of course, you need to take actions both on the revenue and the cost side. I think, we index a lot on cost cutting, which is very, very important. But maybe a question that I have for you also, Rabih, is what are you maybe starting to see in terms of continuing to think about the top line and not just the bottom line? Or maybe what you've seen from previous maybe turnaround experiences or previous crises, if you were to help people think through, okay, cut your costs, figure it out, cut your salaries if you need to. Yes, maybe let go of certain people if you must, do it well. But now let's talk about the top line. What have you seen?
So in summary, what I've seen is pre-conflict, anything that was a B-tier strategy now becomes a real strategy, right? So whether it's discounts, or I'll give you a super brief example. A client of mine that does physio, chiro, all kinds of sports medical treatments, where people aren't feeling safe to come to the clinic, is now offering this at home. Now, pre-conflict, that is a little bit of a logistical nightmare. You need to figure out, sort of pricing and transportation and doing all of that. And it's not a great margin, because the whole idea is, you have volume and now all of a sudden it's become a strategy that we're looking at during this turmoil, because it's going to keep revenue at a place where, all right, I'm not super concerned about margin, but I'd really like to at least to be able to pay rent and salaries. So, I've seen, you've seen restaurants offering, sort of these deep discounts. The idea there is, again, they're not protecting their margin. What they're doing is protecting the livelihood of the team and the ability to continue in somewhat of a break even, right? Like kind of teetering on the edge of. I don't think any of these things are highly profitable. So that's what I mean by anything that was a B tier strategy, before the conflict, is now something that we're seriously looking at, just to get those revenues going. And it's obviously very sector dependent, but there's always some sort of, well, I don't want to say always, because I think there are some niches that are not, that are less likely. But I mean, there's always like a mini pivot, or like a, let's think outside of the box, and how can we continue to deliver the service or the product that we are here for, but in a way that addresses the concerns of today's reality. Whether it's safety, whether it's price, whether it's any of these things.
I really appreciate that. Actually, you made me think of something. So one of the clients one of our clients, we actually helped them with their business planning for this year. So at the end of last year. And because we're very disciplined and we love documentation, we had made a list with the broader organization of all their possible strategic choices, right? And then out of those, they had eliminated a few because like, oh, I'm not interested in this client tier, maybe not this year, maybe next, whatever. And so one thing that they were able to do is actually just go back to that list.
Yeah.
And lo and behold, there were things that they had said no to before because the market conditions were different and the choices they wanted to make were different, where they were like, actually, we could just do that. We already have these ideas,
Yeah. The context has changed. The context has changed.
Yeah. And I think like just having that documentation allowed them not to have to like panic, brainstorm. They were just kind of able to go back to their old ideas and say, which one would we revisit now? And that was very, very helpful. Maybe one last thing I want to ask about this ability to adapt. And then I do want us to spend some time on how do you make tough decisions with compassion, because I think you have a lot of really beautiful examples or approaches to share with us. But in terms of the adaptability, one of the toughest things in moments of crisis, and you've done it together with Alex, you gave us a lot of examples a couple of years ago from a turnaround management perspective, which is that you still have to be crafty and creative and adaptable. And this isn't about putting your head in the sand and hoping the crisis will pass. You still have to come up with new solutions, new products, new ideas. You gave us the example of your Chinese client. I remember, you gave us a couple of examples last year where you were working with more of a fast-moving consumer good company, and how do we get rid of the stock and repackage and rebundle what we have, and so on and so forth. But like, how do you keep, not so much like what ideas of adaptability, but how do you keep the organization adaptable? Because that requires a lot of energy and a lot of positivity at the same time as we are having to make difficult decisions.
Look, it's a tricky question, because in normal times, there's not much you need to adapt to, right? You're really focusing on the basics of growth and margins and managing people and stuff like that. And you don't typically spend a lot of time planning for something like this, or for like COVID or anything like that, right? Like these are what's the word I'm looking for? Like it's something that really alters the way you need to do business at a most basic level. It's transformational in the worst possible way, right? So the I deal mostly with SMEs, right? So SMEs by definition are a little bit more nimble, a little bit more agile. They typically are founder-led or sort of owner. At least there's some level of involvement. And because of the amount of brain space that this business takes on a personal level, right? I mean, these founders tend to think about work a lot. There's you're smiling to that. So there's always a certain level of sort of daydreaming or I don't know if daydreaming is the right, like paranoid, sort of daydreaming. Sometimes there's always your mind goes in so many different directions. You're talking about adaptability like it's an exercise that someone needs to do and keep this document updated or need to have a process for it. It does. I mean, at least in my reality and the reality of my clients, it just doesn't exist, right? It just doesn't work like that. And I think COVID again left such a mark that people are going immediately back to that but look, adaptability is really down to the people in the business also, right? Their ability to change on the fly, their problem solving skills, the way they react to unexpected, sort of change of plans. This is a very personal thing also. Some people are much better problem solvers and are much more attuned to big changes in the context than others. So I think, when you have those skills internally, all it takes is just planting the seed or just kind of floating an idea, and then the people around you and sort of that team hopefully will be able to put some structure to it, and and I think my answer for me is probably the I'm not used to this level of unstructured answer, right? Like this, the consultant in me wants to give you a really sort of structured, methodology, but the question of methodology of adaptability, and how are you supposed to expect, plan, and adapt to something like this without being thrown in the deep end, literally? No life jacket, no floaters, no swimming lessons. You're being thrown into the deep end and basically told survive. So it becomes a question of survival.
Yeah, I mean, look, the nerd in me facing the consultant in you will say that at least it's also what I see in a company like mine. Of course, I understand that it's a lot harder to do at scale. And we actually have a session. So our last week is how do you do this at scale? But staying here at this level for a minute, we always say it's about your ability to like sense, probe, and respond. And what we mean by that is that, similar to your example, like the market is telling you what it wants. Maybe it's not very loud, but it is giving you feedback about what it will pay for or not. And I think that sometimes when we're in a very risk-averse mindset, very present-oriented, we're not listening to that. So I think, the first thing that maybe I would say is like listen to what your clients are saying, call them, talk to them, find out. But then as a founder, I think like maybe something I do is I'll never say no to a crazy idea. Yeah. So like this conference was put together in 2 weeks because Tala was like, hey, listen, people are really struggling right now. They need an answer. We always say that we're there when leaders need answers. Every event has been canceled in April. How about we start our conference? And I was like, great. And this was a week before Eid. And so I think like maybe just keeping the optimism from a founder or a leader perspective to say like, why don't we try this out? I agree with you. There's no like definitive process for this, but there's also just the general messaging to your team about like, no, we will find new things to do. And we're already like sitting together as a team and saying, what will people pay for right now? And what are new products or services that we can develop? And I think keeping that rhythm and the energy around it is the only thing you can do, but you got to do it, 100%. Right?
And I think gauging, I think is the key one here where I don't want to say don't just take no for an answer, but really try to understand what are the limitations, what are the concerns, what are the, what is stopping your existing customer from writing you that check in this reality, in this new reality. And then how can you find a solution for some of these concerns? Can you somehow make it work?
Yeah, absolutely. All right, I want to move us to our last chapter. It is in the title of the session, so we do want to talk a little bit about downsizing in particular. And I think something that I've always loved in our interaction around this topic, Rabia, is that you always mix, you always mix the ability to make hard decisions with compassion and care. Earlier today you said, when you downsize, you ruin lives. You even said, what if we start by the overseas suppliers? Like, maybe you didn't notice yourself saying that, but I heard it. And I was like, that's actually really kind, because the suppliers that are in this market are suffering just as much as you. So I thought that that like tiny nudge to a prioritization was, again, very human. And so I want to maybe take a second here to talk about that aspect, because I think that in our preparation and many of our conversations before, you've given a lot of really great examples of how to keep this process deeply human, whether it's in how you prioritize your decision making, or it's in how you communicate, or even to some degree collaborate with your people on making those decisions. Yeah. I wonder if you could talk to us a little bit about that. I know you have a lot of examples to share as well.
Look, I think the overarching, the overarching approach needs to be, you didn't build this business by being a cold-hearted robot, right? You built it through relationships. You built it by building a team. And when you unfortunately have to downsize, I think the same approach needs to apply, if anything, maybe even more, right? Whatever you're downsizing now, you might need to, sort of resize back up in a matter of months, and hopefully that is the case for everyone. So we touched on it before. I think you need to apply. It's a limited set of tools, but you need to apply it in a way that meets the business needs, obviously. But that also takes into consideration, the size of the team and these people and how long they've been with you and what they've done for you in the past, and the role they've played in your 0 to sort of growth journey as well. So the idea is to put very sort of bluntly, is to ruin as few lives as possible. You know what I mean? Because like I said today, if someone gets laid off, I think they're going to have a hard time. They're going to have a hard time getting back on their feet in this current reality. So I want to go back to the ITP example, right? Because you gave a clear example, and you gave some of the details of it. But the idea, first of all, that it's a gradual, measured reduction, right? People aren't being laid off; they're reducing their number of hours and a proportionate reduction in salary. So presumably, these people are still being, still able to meet their financial commitments as, sort of families and et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. And the idea that the leaders or the senior management of the business is taking a bigger hit, because at the end of the day, it's a numbers game, right? Like what you're trying to do is force fit pieces of a puzzle into something that makes sense and doesn't lose you too much money at the end of the month. And the idea that the senior leaders are taking a bigger hit than the rest of the team does two things. First of all, it makes sense numbers wise, because it's a lower hanging fruit. It's a bigger lower hanging fruit. And second of all, these are people that, again, presumably can sort of carry the burden of a salary pay cut much more than sort of the more junior team. So for me, that is a great example of doing it with compassion And I think you'll see a lot of small businesses today in the UAE are probably doing something along those lines, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's structured and communicated as effectively as ITP did, I don't know. But at the end of the day, that is the ultimate, that is the goal, right? Maybe those founders don't have the advice or the expertise to communicate it, structure it, package it in such a in a way like that. But at the end of the day, that should be the spirit of whatever they're doing. That should be the spirit of downsizing, or the harsher word of cost cutting. That should be the spirit of it, I think.
Yeah, I think that's really fair. And we had a session earlier this week with Claire Furlong from FGS about how to communicate these things, but also broadly. And I'll ask you as well for some of your stories. But I have a question from the audience here. And I've seen this with my clients as well. So the question is, I'm curious about how we assess which employees to keep based on capability. Do we think that leaders spend enough time meaningfully evaluating skills and potential, not just current roles? I remember, again, one of your turnaround examples where you repurposed people to do other jobs because they were. Can you share that story with us?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think if someone's role, well, look, there are two separate subjects here. I think that prioritizing low performers. Prioritizing high performance and sort of downsizing low performers seems like an obvious choice if you're going to take the dry cut, sort of colder approach, more clinical approach to this. Most small businesses may or may not have a structured performance appraisal, sort of system, but at the end of the day, the founder always has an impression of people's performance or their dedication to their business or to the business or their commitment to the work. So yeah, getting rid of low performers makes total sense. But again, you're going down the very dry cut, sort of clinical approach, which ideally as a founder, you're not doing, at least that's not what we're here to discuss today. The repurposing of roles, I think, is something that's very, very interesting, because with the reduction in volume or utilization or occupancy or whatever metric applies to your business today, certain roles become totally obsolete, right? Mm-hmm. But you might find that after a conversation with this person and giving them the option of a salary cut or being laid off, or sort of repurposing them into another role that, is now more required because we're doing this slight pivot or a temporary pivot or sort of we're thinking out of the box right now. And we need help, doing 1, 2, and 3 rather than what you previously did for the last couple of years, which is now simply not relevant to where the business stands or what the business needs. So obviously, repurposing of roles is a big thing. Some of it is totally horizontal, and some of it will be a slight downgrade in sort of salary or skill set requirements. And if you have a frank and open and honest conversation with the employee, then you might find that they're okay taking on a lesser role, lesser between brackets.
Hey, listen, if someone wants my job, I'll take theirs. No, but actually, honestly, I have seen that with my clients, jokes aside. I have seen these roles renegotiated, even if it's temporary. Like, okay, of course, when things go back, not to normal, but like when this, output is required again, you can go back to your original job. But in the meantime, you'll be more useful here. How about you do that, right? I've seen that happen. And as you say, like, people are happy. They also want to help out and feel like they're being useful. So no one wants to do a useless job either. So I think people are quite happy to be given some guidance about where they can benefit the business and will jump on board with that as well. Maybe one last question, Rabih, for you before we get to our lightning round. How have you advise leaders on how to communicate about these things? Like, how early should they be transparent? How can they involve everyone?
I mean, yeah, look, obviously it's hard to do it at scale, but with the smaller businesses that I deal with, I think an open, honest, candid conversation is obviously needed. But look, I think the context means that there are no secrets, right? There's no employee that's completely oblivious to what's going on, right? If you walk around the mall today in a shop, a sales attendant is just standing around, having not attended to anyone for the last 3 hours. They're obviously not thinking, oh, my job is easy. They're thinking, if this continues, I'm going to lose my job. So the idea of having open, honest conversation, maybe not to the extent of sharing bank balances and stuff like that, like you do. I know you're extremely candid and open with your team. But I think an open and honest conversation is super important, and breaking it down to, sort of like a language that obviously that the whole team can understand, can relate to, and the scenarios being made very clear to them. I have a client who actually gave everyone the choice of either being laid off or going, sort of on a salary cut, or, sort of taking some leave off. Like the choices were given to the team, and a lot of people sort of took a little bit of time to weigh the options and stuff like that, but they chose what suited them best. So yeah, not everyone can have the choice. Not every business is going to be able to do this, but I think the most important thing is to be completely honest and open. There's no point in denying it. There's no point in not sharing the burden with the team. And I have a client. It's funny because I have a client of mine where the founder basically bore the entire responsibility for cash flow and kind of, sort of meeting the month end payroll and all the payments that he needed to make. And then when we implemented a change and basically made his two most senior people participate in these sort of cash flow planning meetings and basically share the burden, he was so relieved. He was so relieved, and the ideas in those meetings became, because so many good ideas come from team and come from bottom up and not top down, right? And so this can also apply to this whole, sort of cash flow preservation, downsizing, whatever you want to call it, whatever specific direction a company takes. So yeah, communication is so important. And I think when your team is small enough, you have the luxury of being able to just sit them down, talk to them like, I don't want to say like family. I think that's a little bit overused. Like adults, exactly. Like adults that have a vested interest in this. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
so yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. Rabih, we've come to the end of our time together. Thanks. Honestly, I learn a lot every time we speak. And I know anyone who's listened to this today, I think feels a bit held because sees that they're not the only person having to deal with all of this, but I'm sure will extract value about small, very practical things that they can do. And that's, we can only take day by day at the moment. To wrap us off, we have a series of questions that we ask all of our speakers at the end of the session. They're short questions. I just love to hear your answers. Are you ready?
I am.
Okay. So for you personally, Rabih, what is keeping you grounded at the moment?
Look, for me personally, it's the idea, and I don't want to sound overly sort of poetic or fanboy, but really the idea of the UAE's resilience, the sort of the leadership, the way this is being addressed, the very sort of rational approach to this. And plus the track record of Dubai's, ability to bounce back and sort of, recover from this. I mean, really, for me, this is the number one. This is the number one sort of comfort for me.
Yeah, really. I mean, I echo that. Coming from Lebanon, I can tell you that if I was there, I'd have a very different reality, sadly, at the moment. So,
but I mean, this also anywhere, Europe, North America, I don't think would be able to deal with this as effectively as the UAE does, and wouldn't be able to bounce back from it.
Absolutely. Okay. On the other end of the spectrum, what helps you to stay limitless, to keep possibility, imagination, and curiosity alive in this moment?
Look, I'm gonna give you a very pragmatic answer. It's the fact that we have a little bit more time on our hands.
Oh no, that's true. I understand that. Like, although of course the situation is horrible, the extra hours that we have allow us to do maybe some thinking that we didn't have time for.
100%. Some housekeeping, some thinking that you wanted to do, some things that you haven't been able to do in a while because you were so focused on sort of getting to the next step. So for me, that's yeah.
Fair enough. What is a leadership quality that you've seen emerge in the Arab world in this moment of uncertainty that the rest of the world can learn from?
I think the obvious answer is compassion. I think maybe, again, not to put down the Western world or anything, but I think they would have a much more dry, clinical approach to something like this. I think our compassion is I think sets us a little bit apart. Not worlds apart, but a little bit apart.
It's okay. By all academic measures, we are a community-oriented society, and therefore we will be higher on compassion than individualistic societies. It's not surprising. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And then lastly, kind of looking back at our conversation here today, if you were to kind of not summarize, but pick the top 3 things that you would tell leaders to do right now so they can be in a better position in the future, what would that be?
I think it's going to end up being a summary of everything we talked about over the last hour, which is, quantify, like assess, really assess. Don't do any sort of, rash. Assess and quantify, first of all. Second of all, no emotional or rash decisions. And then the last one is look beyond the next, sort of 2-3 months. Don't completely lose sight of the next 2-3 months. I know the next 2-3 months are going to be, super tough, and this is where the focus is. But don't forget that there needs to be survivability beyond that.
Absolutely. This too shall pass, and we shall be here to, reap the benefits when it does, inshallah.
Yeah, I hope so.
Thank you again, Rabih, for generously sharing your insights and all the stories.
Thank you for having me. I love these conversations. Thank you so much for having me.
Likewise. And honestly, I have to tell you, I did go back and share the session that we did together on Turnaround a couple of years ago with some of the leaders that I advised a few weeks ago. So it's like, actually, Rabih and Alex are really good at making this both really practical and extremely human. You should watch this. So I really think these sessions are really great resources. I want to thank you. I want to thank anyone who was here with us and the questions that they posted for us to discuss and for learning with us. We really appreciate anyone who spent some time. And of course, if you think that someone else will benefit from this session, you can later share the YouTube and podcast formats, which we'll publish on our website in less than an hour or so. And the last thing I'll ask is, if you did find value in today's session, we do ask for one contribution, which is that you answer our survey on leading in the Arab world. We really want to capture how leaders in this region are navigating uncertainty so that others around the world can learn from us. Rabih talked to us about compassion. We'd love to hear your perspective. It only takes about 4 minutes of your time. We'd be really grateful for that. Conversation continues for another 2 weeks. We still have this afternoon a session with Aline Kamakian, who's the founder of Myrig and Batchik, but also works with the World Central Kitchen and just launched an initiative, speaking of how to keep the lights on for restaurants, called Sufra, where you can fund a meal for the internally displaced people in Lebanon, and it will be fulfilled directly by one of the existing restaurants and its staff. A great way to put the money straight into the economy. Join us today at 4 p.m. It's called Food and Solidarity, Responding to Crisis, One Meal at a Time. We hope to see you then. Thank you for being with us, and stay safe. Cool. Nice.